I did.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the January 22nd Selectmen's meeting. At this time, I'll ask Selectman Bennett to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any corrections or comments? Then all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. At this point in our agenda, we welcome new public business. That is, if you would like to bring something to the attention of the selectmen that's not on the agenda tonight, please feel free to take this opportunity to bring something to our attention. Any new public business this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on. Public hearing will be held in the application of Lou Marinello, doing business as Lou Frank Motors LLC, 20 Newbury Street. Lou Marinello, owner, for a change of ownership of a Class 2 dealer's license at that location. Is there someone here to speak to the, would you mind going to the podium?
That's it.
Introduce yourself and speak into the mic because we do record for our local cable access.
Louis Marinello, Louis Frank Motor Cars LLC. We're just doing a change of name on the license at 20 Newbury Street, Class 2 used car dealer license.
And are you becoming the owner or is someone
No,
else?
I am the owner. I've been the owner. The owner of 20 Newbury Street has a dealer license already, and
Oh,
we're
okay.
just going to be we signed a lease with them, and we're going to be taking over the 8-car license.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, everything's in order, the paperwork-wise?
All the paperwork is in order, Mr. Chairman, and the license, the existing license there has a limit of 8 vehicles on the lot.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Mr. Bennett,
All set, thank you.
Mr. Clark,
I'm all set.
Mr. Mills.
Yeah, I should know this, Louis. Where's 20 Newbury?
North Shore Auto Body, right next to
Picarello,
before
next,
Chili's.
next to Picarello's? Next to Chili's?
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
just before it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Langwise.
No, I'm all set, thank you.
I'm all set as well. This is a public hearing. Is there anybody in the public who'd like to speak to this matter?
Motion to close public hearing?
Second.
Motion made and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'll entertain a motion on the application.
Move the application as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Next, a public hearing will be held on the application of Interstate Management Company, LLC, doing business as DoubleTree, North Shore, Boston, 50 Ferncott Road, Michael Tyler Woodcock, manager, for a change of manager at that location. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Trask and members of the board. My name is Al Ganapoli. I represent Interstate Management Company. Eleanor Hargraves, who you may have known, had been the manager of record at the DoubleTree for a number of years. She's left us, and we have a new person who would like to identify and have approved as the manager of record. Michael Woodcock has worked for years for Marriott Corporation, resident of Beverly, so he worked in Boston at the Renaissance for his last station, if you will, and it's now closer to home and glad to be working up at on the Danvers site. So he's here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Woodcock, would you offer some background and experience, your experience?
Absolutely. I've got over 15 years of hotel experience, everything ranging from front of house, back of house, food and beverage, sales and events. Pretty much if you go into a hotel, I've done that job before. Currently the assistant general manager at the Danvers DoubleTree, Boston North Shore, overseeing and reporting or having food and beverage, banquets, front office, back of house, Starbucks, pretty much all the operation aspects report directly to me.
Mr. Clark, start with you, sir.
No questions, I guess.
Mr. Mills, any questions, sir?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Langwise?
So did Hilton steal you from Marriott? Is this a
little bit.
war that's going on?
No, not necessarily a war. It's more of a being closer to home is really nice. I've got a 7-year-old that's going to school in Beverly. My wife teaches in Beverly, so being close to home says a lot.
Well, it's my two favorite hotels, so I've got points at both. so
All right, well, we're going to win
it's-
you over.
It's
and
a
have
great place.
Hilton Honors is going to be the best honors program out there. It might not be the
Your
biggest, but
renovation's beautiful in that building, too. I love it in there, so.
let's just wait till the end of 19 when we finish doing all of our renovations.
What are you doing?
We're going to be hopefully redoing all of our cabana rooms, updating the lobby look, our banquet, grand ballrooms getting a makeover.
Yeah, that needs it.
Yeah, it's had some wear and tear on it.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well, make sure you let us know when that happens.
absolutely. We'll
Get
have you
the
guys come down to Cocoa
advertisement.
Keys and go down the water slide.
I don't go in a public water slide. But thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, Selectman Bennett.
All set, thank you.
My common questions are answered in the application, at least about the tip certification. I'm sure it's in here someplace. Have you ever been the manager of record for a facility that's had a liquor license violation?
I have not.
All right, those are my questions. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone on the public who'd like to speak to this applicant or the application? Seeing none?
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
No. Motion made and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. I'll entertain a motion on the application.
Move the application as presented.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you, guys.
Good luck.
Easy. Appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Mr. DiNapoli. Thank you. Remember when we were young?
It's harder and harder to remember every day, Mr. Mills, but Your Honor, it's nice to see you as usual. And the board, thank you, good luck. Happy New Year to all.
Thank you.
We worked together.
All right, the next agenda item.
years ago.
The board will discuss financing options for the Ivan G. Smith School project. So as most of you know, the Selectmen and the FinCom have unanimously passed the warrant article as presented. This is a warrant article that presents the details regarding the Smith School reconstruction, and the cost of that project. And the board, had questions for the town manager on financing, as well as open the opportunity to the public. Currently, this warrant article is being forwarded with the standard funding mechanism that we've used successfully in the past of 30 years. That is what this warrant is predicated upon. But there is discussion about options unrelated to the actual, I shouldn't say unrelated. They're related, but not part of the warrant. As you know, we had previous warrant articles for previous projects subject to a override or debt exclusion is more accurate. That's not what this warrant article is. This warrant article is going forward, presented in its entirety for the scope of the project, the price of the project, and with the presumption of a 30-year level funding mechanism, as we have done in the projects past. But because we had opened the discussion, and I said we would continue to have that dialogue, I'd like to give the town manager an opportunity to answer the questions that were posed to him already, and then I'll open up to the board, and then I'll open up to the public for any questions that weren't answered, asked and answered previously. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finance Director Rodney Conley walked around the room a few minutes ago and distributed a memo that went out to the board in their packets on Friday. So I hope some of you have had a chance to give that a glance. It's also on the town's website. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the memo was a compilation of many of the questions that have been asked since we started looking at our financing options for the Smith School back on December 4th at the Financial Summit. That conversation was continued on December 14th, and again at the warrant review on January 8th, when the board voted to move the project forward to the Finance Committee with the expressed desire to schedule an agenda item for tonight's meeting to focus specifically on what the financing options for the project look like. I'll take just a minute or two and walk through many of the items on the financing memorandum, excuse me, that was just distributed. As you noted,
Copies if someone didn't get one.
So what we do know about the project, the MSBA voted in December to approve a $52 million construction project for the Smith School and has agreed to fund up to $20.5 million of that project. The $52 million project is at this point, we think, a conservative number. It includes roughly $7.5 million in contingency, some of which is related to project escalation costs, some of which is simply related to the unknowns at this point because the design is preliminary. But it's a conservative number at this point because once the MSBA approves their funding for the project, that number is set in stone. So the $52 million project with a $20.5 million state grant leaves the town with the potential for $31.5 million related to construction if all of the dollars in the $52 million project are spent. And that certainly wouldn't be the plan. The town has a history of delivering these projects with contingency intact at the end of the project, and that would bring down the town's portion of the project. But the conversation that started in December was focused on how to finance that $31.5 million that would be the town's portion of the project after the MSBA grant were applied to that. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit, but the first question that has come up throughout this process that is related to the project has to do with the size of the project. And we've been discussing this at most of our public meetings to date. We do know that the MSBA is projecting a fairly significant increase in student population in Danvers over the next 10 years. The growth is naturally occurring a little bit faster in the Smith District than elsewhere, but it is certainly occurring everywhere. The current kindergarten class is the largest that the town has seen. We know that there's a position being considered for this year's budget for a new first grade teacher at Smith. We approved a kindergarten teacher last year at Smith. So the trend is occurring already. And I know Dr. Dana and Eric Crane are here tonight representing the schools, and I know that they're about to undertake a project to look at the district lines and consider flexible zoning to make sure that the growth that the MSBA sees coming lands evenly within the schools and their respective capacities. This would be the largest school in town, and that is largely because it is the school that is up for replacement at this point in the 25-year cycle that was started in the early 90s. One of the questions that has come up, and it started at this meeting, there were some town meeting members who I think rightly wanted to know, is there a funding plan in place? Can we afford this? Can we afford to build this project? And the answer is that the town can afford to build a project without a debt exclusion. We've been working to rebuild the school stabilization fund for the better part of 5 years now. We have about $5.8 million in the school stabilization fund. Based on current budget performance and trends, we think we're going to need a little bit more than $8 million in that fund during the 5 or 6 years of peak debt associated with this project to shave that off so that the project does fit within the current levy, which is what the town has always done with its school projects. So I think the key, and there was some confusion, but it's important to note, the fiscal year 20 budget that we're building does assume using some of that school stabilization fund, and the financing model that would allow us to present a balanced budget would be stretching the debt out over the 30 years. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to put the warrant article together for town meeting to consider in the first place. The other question that's related to that has been if we can afford it, then why would we consider the exclusion at all? And some of the data that I pulled together for the board in thinking about this has to do with some of the information that has been presented in the last few budgets. We know that from the financial summit in the fall, one of the metrics that is looked at as a measure of a community's financial health is the percent of the total operating budget that is for salaries. Generally, what you see is that increases as a percent of the budget. In Danvers, it's been 57% since at least 2009, so it's a very stable number. I think that's attributable to certainly the administrations that preceded the current administration. We have collective bargaining units in Danvers that understand that this is a community that has never approved a budget exclusion and would not take one lightly. They generally go into negotiations with that in mind, and generally do settle favorable contracts for both the employees and the town. We also know from the FY17 budget, we presented some information. We introduced a new position that year, and we wanted to look at headcount historically. Headcount is largely flat in terms of total employees over the last 10 years. and as a percent or as a ratio to residents, it's declined. So there are fewer employees per thousand now than there were. That being said, we're currently $45,000 from the levy limit, and a number of the issues that this board and the Finance Committee and the town meeting deals with every year are costs that are outside of the town's control. We provide health insurance to our employees. The town has control over the design of its health plan, and we're currently looking at that health plan for the second time in 3 years to try to make adjustments to control those costs. But to a certain extent, we're kind of at the whim of the larger healthcare market, which trends between 5 and 10% over the last few years. We have statutory requirements for pension. The gas and electricity that we buy increases at more than 2.5%. And Essex Tech has been, I think, wildly successful to the tune of about a 7% assessment increase on average over the last 3 years. So those are all things that have to be built into the budget as we start our process each year. And these drivers put more and more pressure on the operating budget. So when the question is asked, what would be the purpose of doing exclusion if we don't need one? Well, one of the things we'll talk about is some of the long-term interest savings. But the other factor is that the more debt service or projects that get built into the levy, the more pressure that puts on core services like police and fire and schools. And at some point, there has to be a trade-off between maintaining that practice and the services that are provided. And I think related to that, there have been a number of projects sort of at least in discussion stage, certainly since I got here 4 years ago, one of which is a new public works facility at some point. Paying for capital through the tax levy has been an effective strategy, but as we discussed over the last month or so, the high school project was level funded out 30 years, and that's eaten up a lot of our long-term debt service capacity. The option that the FY20 budget is built on for the Smith School would fund it in a similar manner, and that would tie up even more of our long-term debt service. And as we do that, it makes it more difficult to find ways to fund things like a potential public works facility, the senior center, which was built not that long ago in municipal years, is already starting to be an aging building. We also have a growing senior population, so there's a potential to need to upgrade or renovate the senior center at some point. We're going to be ready to do dredging again in the not too distant future, protecting open space, things like that. So that we have pressures coming from all directions on the budget, and I think other than the financing in terms of interest savings, another thing that I think this board has heard questions about is what is the impact either way. One of the basic questions, which I think is an important question that's come up, is how is it less expensive to pay for a school using an exclusion versus not using an exclusion? And we've used the sort of the construct to think about this. It's like a typical mortgage on a home. When we pay an equal payment out over a number of years, we certainly have the option in the out years to refinance or restructure that. But generally speaking, you have a predictable, consistent, lower average annual payment, but you pay a lot more interest in the long run by doing that, as opposed to structuring it with larger payments, principal payments up front. And the same is true for municipal debt. Generally, you would try to structure debt so that it peaks early and then tails off, and that allows you to layer in new debt as you move forward. So by level funding it out, it provides short-term relief, but it limits what you can do in the long term. There's been a question that's been asked a few times in terms of whether, I think there's the impression that it saved the town money to complete the prior to the middle school and high school project without a debt exclusion. And when we adjust those individual projects versus the proposed project that was not built, the town ended up borrowing an additional $20 million in principal to do those two projects. Plus, you'd have to take a guess at the interest related to that. Based on today's rates, it's probably somewhere around 10, maybe 15 million. I think we say 10 to 20 million here, just based on the modeling for this particular project. But that was done by spreading the debt out over a much longer period, again, to reduce upfront costs. Another question, it has to do with the taxes, and I think that this board has already had the conversation. The way, when you're looking at the structuring models, the trade-off for higher tax payments in the early years is significantly less tax paid in the long run overall. But that again is the trade-off. It's the early years versus the late years. I think an important question, we've built the stabilization fund. What would happen to that if the town were to ask the question about a debt exclusion? And I think the answer, and again, this board has already started to have that conversation, is we as staff would still be recommending to this board and FinCom and town meeting that money be utilized to offset debt service the way it always has been. And that would give, I think, the opportunity to achieve some of those long-term savings while reducing some of the additional upfront costs. Selectman Bennett asked the question in December about what policy tools may be available to try to offset the cost of something like this, or frankly, for either project in terms of folks on fixed incomes. And the assessor's been pulling together information. We do have several tools, one of which is the increasing the elderly tax exemption, which the town currently offers at $1,500. The state mandates a $1,000 benefit. We still have the option to increase that benefit from $1,500 to $2,000. That would be a town meeting vote in May. So that we could increase the benefit by 50%. That's still a tool that is available. We also have the option of increasing hours for senior tax work-off. Another question that's been asked is having to do with other reasons why a town would even consider something like this if they didn't have to. We've been in a battle with the rating agencies for a number of years. We certainly believe Danvers is long overdue for a AAA bond rating based on the budget practices and consistency over time. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback we get is that sort of counterintuitively, the fact that the town has never approved and has in fact rejected exclusions is a negative rating factor in the eyes of the rating agencies. We've run some modeling. Our financial advisors have taken recent bond issuances by AAA communities and looked at the interest rates on those projects compared to AA1, which is ours. They're finding, generally it's up to 1/4 basis point difference in those projects. In a good economy, it's a little bit smaller spread. As the economy softens, the spread tends to grow. But this is rough math. But using a $30 million project, that's somewhere between $400,000 and $1.7 million in savings if the town were AAA. Our position has consistently been, as staff, making recommendations that we would never pursue policies to chase AAA if it weren't in the best interest of the town. But I think the question the board is wrestling with is a perfectly legitimate question to be dealing with, and I think a secondary benefit could potentially be to position the town for the AAA. And then I think several town meeting members asked the right question at your last meeting, which is, what exactly is this, and why isn't town meeting asked to vote on something like a debt exclusion? And the short answer to that is, well, it's a two-part question. The first is that the debt exclusion is a temporary increase to a tax levy. The budget override is a permanent increase to a tax levy. So if a debt exclusion question is posed and approved, the levy increases for the duration of that particular project and then falls back. So you don't change the underlying levy. You're simply approving something off to the side of that eventually goes away. And MGL Chapter 59 states explicitly that the question of a budget override or debt exclusion is one that either a Board of Selectmen or a City Council has to consider and vote on by a 2/3 margin, which in a town with 5 selectmen would be a 4-member margin, to send the question directly to the voters at a special election or an annual election where a majority vote would be required to approve that. And I think what's partly confusing there is generally what you see are communities that are in a position where the only way they can construct a project is with a debt exclusion. Danvers is in, I think, the enviable position of having prepared over the last 5 years to set aside money to avoid that if necessary, which is why the town meeting voting to approve the project, there is a path forward to build a project without a debt exclusion. I think the question, as I understand it, before this board is, should we be looking at an option to save money in the long run, cost being additional payments up front? And that is the question, I think, that is, as I understand, I hope that we've been able to provide some material to help think that through. And we would be happy to try to answer any additional questions that you have tonight, or moving forward, for that matter.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for the board. Before I do, I'd like to recognize some people in the audience. First of all, Dr. Lisa Dana, who's our superintendent of schools. Thank you for being here. School committee has sent Arthur Scamus and my friend Eric Crane, and also Sierra Lyons is the chair of the finance committee. So I thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm going to open it up to the members of the board first, and then open it up to the audience if there are still unresolved or open questions you would like to know about. But again, this was a response to discussions about potential borrowing mechanisms. The project is being forwarded to town meeting with the scope that's defined, a price that's defined, and a model of borrowing, which is the 30 years. And that's what the town meeting members will vote upon. This was prudent what-if scenarios are being offered when it comes to the actual borrowing after the fact. 30 years or 20 years doesn't change how much the construction is. It changes how much you would borrow eventually overall. But it doesn't change the fact that this is a project with a $52 million price tag. There's $7.2 million, $5 built in contingency. We know that if we spend the money that we anticipate spending, we would get $20.5 million reimbursement. So the town meeting is asked to authorize borrowing up to $31.5 million. That's a fixed price. That's a known quantity, and that's what we're going for. So again, the discussion had been opened up. We want to make sure there's clarity on what's going on at town meeting, but also get the answers that people asked. So I'll start with the board because they started with the discussion with some questions. I'll start with Mr. Clark, sir. Do you have any questions? Any
I had
more
a feeling you're going to call me first.
Oh.
I have some observations which I have addressed in the past relative to past history of school projects, ones that have failed, ones that have not failed, ones that have succeeded, the ramifications of answers. And it's very easy if you want to talk just numbers. I think that there's something a little bit more than just numbers here. There's certain people here in our town, like myself and others, who have done nothing but pay for schools their entire adult life as a resident of the town. I've been paying property taxes for over 50 years now, and I was at a school we've been paying for, whether it was a high school, the sub school, all the elementary schools, and then the cycles come around, and this is completing that cycle. I've got a lot of feedback from a lot of people in town since we've been talking about this, and I have passively watched the social media, and I looked at that, and I can't believe comments that are brought up in that all the time, and I don't see any of those people ever at any of our meetings or participating in the process or being town meeting members. And I kind of resent the fact these people think that they're experts, and they haven't been engaged at all in the process all along the way. I'm representing a generation of people who are in their 70s now, and actuarially, I don't care what's going to happen 20 years from now, because I'm not going to be around here most likely. I'll be more than willing to pay my share for the next 20 years. Beyond that, I think the people who are using the facilities and the people who are lucky enough to be here then should be paying that. And that's kind of the philosophy we've had in this town all along, is we've put things off for 30 years. We've kicked the can down the road. Yes, not as bad as the federal government does, but we've put our wants that we have at the present time and given them to our children and grandchildren. I realize, and I'm very frustrated that it's going to limit us so much to be able to borrow for other capital projects over the next 20 to 30 years. This kind of puts us over the brink, this along with the high school. But I think that if any particular project in the future has enough support, that it will be able to, on its own merits, get the override success that it needs, or support that it needs. And a lot of people I know in the past used to criticize Steve's predecessor that he was holding off having an override, and waiting for the big wazoo. And he did the big wazoo with a Holton Richmond, and you get your ass kicked. And you know that the people in town didn't want the override. So I think that it's time that we have to realize what will and what may or may not be passed in this town. I don't want to be redundant, because I've mentioned it in the past. I saw what happened in the early 70s. We had 2 high schools that were passed, were voted for, and one was even designed, and it was all thrown out. We got a very, very poor third choice in the Dunwing and the Smith School. We got facilities that were designed in Texas for Texas, and we had to live with them in New England for New England. And this particular school had a particular educational philosophy that was very popular 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I don't believe it is today. And I always felt bad for my compatriots in the school department who had to teach under those conditions with all the distractions that went along with open education. I think we all agree we need a new school. The people that I can't understand their thinking is the ones that say, oh, is it too big? Why don't we add on to all the schools and make them even and not worry about the redistricting? Redistricting is a minor program. I was redistricted 5 times in elementary, and I loved it because I got to junior high school. I knew all the kids in town, as did my neighbors. It never affected us in an adverse way at all. Kids are flexible. I've heard inklings of what Lisa and the school committee are planning to do with flexible areas, and it looks like they're really going out of their way to accommodate families in this transition period to allow them to go to possibly more than one school during a period of time when there's not every opening in the Smith School, quotation marks, district. I don't want to talk too long. It's just that I am going to be, I'm very happy this being presented as the 30-year option, and it'll be very hard to sell to me to go to the override after we get this past town meeting, if we get it past town meeting. And I think we have to get it past town meeting before we even seriously consider anything like an override. And I don't think the override would ever go if it was part of the main motion. And I'm glad that this has been, I think, brought forth by many town meeting members at the last few meetings. And I think that it's the view of enough people in town now that this is coming to the point where it may be agreeable to all intent in the town. Ancient history, we had people who were 7%ers. John is one of the few people left alive now out of that group. The rest of them, there was a couple more at one of our meetings earlier, and I'm saying, wow, it's kind of interesting, because certainly Bill Nicholson and I remember what happened at that point, and I'm not going to be redundant and talk about Diane's stepfather either, but we had a whole generation of people that got become very involved in this town at a period of time and got our tails kicked pretty bad for a while. Is it always the best? Maybe not. I'm willing to pay my share for the next 20 years. I'm not willing to pay the share for myself and other people beyond 20 years. I'm probably not even going to be around here 20 years from now, so it's kind of redundant. But I do hope that you all understand the necessity of the school and will vote for the school as it's laid out in this warrant article. And then in our infinite wisdom as a member of 5 members on the board, if we decide to if the majority decides to go to the override, the people in the town will be able to make the decision. And the other ones fundamentally is going to pay for this over the next 20 or 30 years. Thank you, Carter.
Thank you. Selectman Mills.
I'm in that old group of old ages that Clark just spoke about. And I would, everything that I think about in connection with our schools includes the fundamental historic fact that my mother was one of 10 immigrant children of Polish immigrants in Danvers Port. And 10 of those children went to the Danvers Public Schools. It's important to me because I live across the street, 48 years worth of taxes, and I have no children, but my grandparents made up for it. I think that I am convinced that we need this school. I am convinced, especially based upon Bill Clark's experience and wisdom, Ann Gardner's, and Bill Nicholson, who was here at our last, I think he was at the last Selectmen's meeting, and Bill strongly believes that if the concept of a new school is coupled with debt exclusion, it will fail. And so what I'm hearing tonight is that a proposal can go to town meeting with the assurance that the town can pay for it, and based upon a 30-year bond or borrowing, I call it a mortgage. And my hope is that it would be subject to renegotiation 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line if the, number one, if the interest rate went down, and also if people in the town wanted then to pursue debt exclusion for the remaining debt and to shorten that down, well, they could. But that doesn't, I don't know, that couldn't happen?
10 years.
What?
Can't refi for 10 years.
Can't refi for 10 years. Okay, well, so 10 years.
I don't want to interrupt you, David.
No,
I
please
think,
do.
and again, I'm the newbie to this particular Commonwealth, but my understanding of the way that the 2.5 law is written is that once the debt is issued, it cannot later be excluded. The decision to exclude debt is an upfront decision.
Okay.
You can refinance generally, so the high school had a 10-year period where you could not refinance it. After 10 years, you can consider refinancing projects, and that's a pretty common practice to have a 10-year callback provision. But the exclusion question is a question that is asked and answered prior to the issuance of debt.
So it's one shot at a debt exclusion on a project like this, and it couldn't later be renegotiated?
It could be refinanced, but it could not later be excluded from the.
Okay. You're sure of that, Steve?
I've read it.
Oh, no, I
but-
don't mean to, if you and
That
town
is,
council.
that's my understanding of, based on my conversations with peers and also with
Well,
reading the
then
law.
one of my hopes has been dashed. But otherwise, I hope that we can go forward with the school on the 30-year plan, and practically everything that Mr. Clark said speaks for me. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, David.
Selectman Amos.
We don't agree. So, first off, kudos to the Smith School Building Committee for bringing in a project and having followed you and gone to some of your open meetings. Great job in reducing costs, and I know that we picked up, I believe, 4 points, 4.5 points, was it, on some great work by DPW for green, whatever they call, green care. The school has to go forward. I don't know how many times we can say this. It would be against the law for us to send this forward, saying in the book, which somebody asked at another meeting, how are we paying for it? It says right in it, borrowing. It would be against the law for us to put that forward without being able to pay for it over 30 years. I hate you sitting there, an attorney looking at me while I'm saying something's against the law. So it is going forward to town meeting per regulation with 30 years. I'm really proud of this board that we didn't cower and wait till after February 4th to say, you know, there is something that could save this town $14 million. I have been sitting over 20 years, town meeting, FinCom in here, and everybody says to me, you know, Diane, you gotta cut some costs. You know, remove some sand, or don't buy that truck or something. That's ridiculous. Those are common operatings. What I think we've done is looked at a cost called interest and have put into place, thank you to the town management and to this board, almost every step necessary to get us to a AAA bond rating. I asked that question all through FinCom. Why can't we go? And we couldn't. We couldn't get there because we have because of our median income, I believe, was one of our holdbacks in this town. And now we've gone through and we've done everything else. We can't give everybody in town a raise, but we had other options. We've put them into place. So now I'm saying $14 million, and now I'm hearing $400,000 is another savings if we had AAA. To me, that's a great cut. You just asked me to cut the budget. We have a way of cutting this budget down the road after the Smith School goes in within months. So we've cut costs. You asked me to cut costs. We do it through contracts, you know, rubbish contracts. I know the finance director's here, and he's probably going through his head with all kinds of things. That's how you cut costs. You go in and you knock off and you renegotiate and you come in with a plan, again, over the last 5 years that we've done, to bring our interest rate down on future borrowing. I think we did a hell of a job. You're hearing some impact. No, I'm not good. I don't want to push it out 30 years. And yeah, I'm not going to be here either, believe it or not. If I am, I'm not going to be going, near the schools, that's for sure. But the DPW, this project isn't pushing the DPW off. The mistake we made in how we financed the high school, I will blame for a lot that's going to happen over 30 years. Level funding, that money, gives me the chills. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Had we done that right, we wouldn't be here for this, because these would be our future projects. At some point, people, you got to pick the project, or, as we've heard in the past, a freeze. And freezes really upset people when they hear there's a freeze on salaries or there's a freeze on whatever. I don't believe in that stuff. So we've already got the DPW that's been pushed off for years. The level funding of the high school will always be something that I'll never be proud of. We're talking senior center. Here I'm always hearing, but the seniors. Our seniors love that senior center. And it's been closed, I believe, twice this year for water pipe breaks or whatever it's been. I don't want to say how many, but around there. I had to listen to people for years about dredging. Now that we've had it, they want more of it. And they're not going to be happy if we don't have it. Protecting open space. One of the committees that we have going right now is LaBelle's Grove. That LaBelle's Grove, the whole 20 years, we were waiting to buy it. My whole 20 years of sitting as that, we were waiting to buy it. We have a committee that's done amazing work, and that would be put on the back burner. I sit on the Rail Trail Committee. That would be put on the back burner unless somebody else wants to pay for it. All of these projects would be put on the back burner, and then after 15 years, so this will go on at least 20 years, and in 15 years, we have to go back and do a recalculation on the projection of students. What is that called? I'm sorry, I always forget the name of that, where we have 15 years, they project out for us how many students. We could have an increase in students in 50, and have to look at an addition to another school, but the beauty is what you've done, what my past boards have done, the past town meeting members have done, our past town manager, this town manager, what you've done over the last, and I was trying to remember 1987 or whatever is when we started the first renovation. What you've done is you've gone through all these schools and you've brought them up to a point where our schools now can be added on, can just be renovated, can be repaired. We got rid of that done wing. Thank you. My son and I got to the pleasure of being in there. Portables we got rid of. Smith School now will be gone. All of our mistakes will be gone. And we've now put ourselves to another cut where we now can have just renovation, keep up with the 15-year plan. I love that 15-year plan. Hopefully this one will be as good. So I'm proud of us for not cowering and hiding behind the fact that we might have an alternative after town meeting. The town meeting is going forward, is going in on February 4th to vote for a great school that has been planned over 30-year financing with school stabilization funds to hit peak year. I don't know why we keep talking about it. We haven't hidden anything. We've given you every chart there is to show you what it will do. So after the meeting, we can start talking about it maybe, if somebody wants to bring it forward. I'm sure that I will. I will be honest with you. But that's not what we're voting on. But just remember, to vote this down doesn't do anything to an override, to a debt exclusion. Excuse me, that's a bad word. To a debt exclusion. This is strictly to put this beautiful school forward, solve another problem over 15 years, and let's move on with the other projects in this town. And again, kudos to my past boards, past town meeting, past FinCom, current. It was a lot of work over a lot of years, and it's a project that you should be proud of because you say, oh, I'm not going to be here. Well, you're not. Well, people, 40 years ago weren't going to be here either, and they're not, but look what they did. They paid it forward. That's what I want to do. I want to pay it forward. I want it right for the next generation. My son is not going to give me grandchildren in Danvers, so it's not going to do me anything here, but I love this town. It's where I grew up. It's my way of paying back, and I feel really good about what we've done for the children, and that's really children and seniors. Those are our two big groups that we need to take care of. That's what we do as middle-aged people. So I could rant and rage for a long time, but, AAA bond rating, boy, would I love to see that in this town, because the way we handle money in this town is like no other town. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Now,
Selectman
if I
Bennett.
change your mind.
Thank you. Questions, I think that's where we were starting. Steve, you said we have a stabilization fund of 5.2 million,
5.8.
5.8.
January, as of July 1st of 2000.
and we're going to need 8 million to do the project, to take care of the peak years
Yeah,
in the
the-
beginning?
Under any model, the peak debt years would be FY '20 to '26. So we're looking at what would be, and these are projections at this point, but what we would need to use each year through those 6 years to keep the debt at roughly a 6% of total operating, which is the marker we've long used internally. So yes, the total projected need over that period would be 8.3 million, and we're
How much you're proposing to take out of that this year?
It'll be a significant amount, because we'd be going from I think it's about $1 million swing in the debt service account this year related to the Smith project. We would have naturally seen about a $250,000 decrease in debt service this year based on retired debt, but that'll be replaced by at least, at this point, probably somewhere between $1 and $1.3 million increase. So we're working those numbers right now in the budget. But and I want to point out, we never actually stopped using the school stabilization fund. I think the thought was, with the high school, it was used and then turned off. But the amount of debt in our debt service that is related to school projects, and we talk about it more as a debt service stabilization fund than a school stabilization fund, because in reality, all of the dollars in our debt service are fungible. Whether a particular dollar is related to a school project or a town project, it's all in the same account.
Yeah, for many years, we call it the school, the high
Yeah.
school, middle school, and the high school, and
But when we look at reducing the peak, we're looking at the aggregate of all of the debt service that the town has and trying to keep it below a certain level. So we would need, the funding that goes into the school stabilization is appropriated by town meeting each year. So we rely on positive budget results. We take a pretty conservative approach to budgeting, and again, this is a practice that has been in place for at least 2 decades. But in a typical year in Danvers, you see both the town departments all spend below their appropriated amount, and revenue generally exceeds in certain line items the budgeted amount. That combination allows us to have free cash on hand to replenish that school stabilization fund annually. So it's a
and
delicate
the free cash that
balance.
was just certified came in at what?
$5.25 million.
That's 5 point, that's
this
where I
year.
get the 5.2
5.2,
from.
yeah.
Okay.
And just as a note, we were at 6.8 million 2 years ago and $7.1 million in free cash last year. We knew it was going to be a lower number this year, but 5.2 is still, we think, a strong free cash number. But certainly, we're close to $2 million lower than we were last year in terms of available funds for town meeting.
So how do you propose to get to the 8?
Well, we don't need to build that. We don't need that account to be at 8 million when the financing first starts. What you would need to do is draw it down each year, and between now and FY '26, we would need to put in an additional $2.5 million.
All right, thanks for that clarification. I thought you had to all of a sudden get back to 8. Okay, so fiscal 2026 are the key years, and
That's kind of that's sort of the peak. And just, again, we talk about, 2 models we talk about are level funding the debt and then equal principal payments. In equal principal payments, you see much higher debt payments in the first few years, and then it tails off. Level funding is like a home mortgage, where your debt payment in year 30 is going to be the same as your debt payment in year 1. So the peak years that we're talking about are not associated with this particular project, but all other debt. So this ends up creating a higher floor, and the peak that's created by that other debt that's in the system is what we look at when we're talking about drawing down the fund.
So because we have this money in the stabilization fund, we're able to do the project itself. We can't afford this project.
If we didn't have the school stabilization fund to offset the peak debt years, we would not be able to pay for this project within the levy, and that's been true, I think, for the last couple of school projects.
Okay, because I still get people out there that ask me, why are we building a school if we can't afford it? Well, we can't afford it. And I think that's a piece that we still need to let people know, that we can't afford it. It's 30 years. We have the stabilization fund. There are other people out there that aren't aware that there's this financing option for this project. I actually had 2 people tell me that. They weren't aware of it. Now, they're not town meeting members, but these are intelligent folks that are well-rooted in town. So I think we still need to get the word out there. Now, they're not going to be voting at town meeting, but after that, we're going to have to finance this project. And as everybody said, it is a good project. There's nothing wrong with the project. It's well thought out. It's going to be a good school, and there certainly is a need for this school because we don't have the capacity in the other schools for the additional enrollment that we're going to have to absorb. Somebody started talking about adding on to the other elementary schools that may be or may not be feasible, but we won't get any state help from that, correct? We'll have to do that on our own?
Well, you can apply under renovation projects, but each of those projects would be considered on its merit. And I mean, certainly, in our conversation, we do know philosophically that the MSBA would rather partner with a school once every 20 years on a big project than every 5 years on a small project. That's not, the demand on their resources is well beyond what they have available to them.
How long did it take us to get the MSBA to accept our project?
This was four
Four-
applications. It was our fourth application.
Four applications for a major project. So I just said some people are concerned about the affordability, we can pay for it. Some people think we should stay within our budget, and a debt exclusion should only be used for emergencies in the future. I mean, I don't know if there's no right or wrong answer, but there is that sentiment out there that we need to stay in our budget, and the 30-year plan keeps us in a budget. Taxes in the future, after 20 years, we'll have a lower tax bite for this project than we will the first 20 years, but nothing else is going to stay static. Other taxes are going to go up. So we'll have higher taxes in the future as well. We can't predict how much that will be, but certainly history repeats itself and taxes continue to go up. So I think it's best that we get this project started as soon as possible before construction costs go up. And those are all my comments and questions for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, these are my observations. I think that the subject of the project and the subject of the borrowing mechanism have been commingled in a manner that they really shouldn't have been. I'm not saying that they don't relate to each other, but the reality is this project has a cost. And the borrowing mechanism that was being discussed, the options, don't change that cost. The cost is the cost is the cost. It's how much you're willing to pay in borrowing. That being, and I've said it multiple times, this project going before town meeting has defined scope, has defined cost, and has designed to be a 30-year borrowing mechanism. So I want to talk about what the actual warrant article is and the questions I've heard, and discuss some of those questions. One is people are questioning the population growth. It's projected that the MSBA said we would be going up by 17%. We actually went back to them, the school project went back to them with a lower number. And they said, based on our models, this town can expect 17% growth over the next 20 years. Now, some people are saying, well, that's unrealistic. We haven't had that kind of explosive growth before. The reality is, when we did the last project, when we did the middle school project, again, we were going to right-size it to our current population. They came back and said, oh, no. No, we think it's going to be bigger than that. I'm sorry, for the high school. And they were within 1% this year of their projected growth.
One person.
One person. One person?
Yeah, one person.
For the kindergarten class.
In the kindergarten class, but 1% overall. So I'm pretty confident that the MSB, that they know exactly how to guide us on population growth. So I don't think that anybody in the audience has a better model, or anybody out in the population has a better model than they have. So I'm going to rely on the experts on that one. And then the question is, well, why do we have to put it at Smith? Why are we absorbing all that growth at Smith? And the reality is, and it's been asked in forums before, is twofold. One is, we're constructing a building, and it's much better, easier, and more cost-effective to construct a building a little bit larger than to go to our other schools and try to add on to it. We won't be guaranteed the reimbursement. We don't know the effect on each of those buildings. I can tell you some of those are pretty landlocked, which means if we're going to expand, I'm going to say Thorpe, for example, you'd have to take parking, or you'd have to take fields, because behind it is wetlands. You're not going out that way. And there's limited land in that area. So, and that's just one example. Same thing with Great Oak. You can expand it, but higher cost, and in the future, it's going to be higher construction costs. The cost of the construction is not going to go down over the next years. Then I heard, and I've heard this before, why are we building in contingency? Well, contingencies is an industry standard. Any construction project, any multi-million-dollar project has a contingency fund. It's an insurance policy. It's what don't we know? Until we start pulling down walls, until we start digging in the earth, what don't we know? What unexpected problems could happen? And we should have contingency for it. We're looking for 14% contingency here. In my profession, I'm a professional project manager for a healthcare insurance company. I install large software and hardware installations. And we build 20% contingency. And it's just so that we don't have to go back. If we didn't build contingency into this project and we ran into some unforeseen issue, we'd have to go back to town meeting and say, oh, can you give us a little more? Oh, can you give us a little more? As these things came up. We all know that when we were doing the middle school, they found a tank underground no one knew about. Contingency covered that cost. I think contingencies, and it's also a little bit misunderstood. Contingency is the authorization to borrow as needed. It's not a hard cost. That $7.5 million isn't going to be taken and used in some manner unless something outside the identified scope of this project were to come up. So the argument regarding contingency from my professional perspective, in looking at the historic use of contingency on our past projects, is perfectly sound. People ask, well, we should review the size and the cost, and are we building an opulent building, and we should really look at every nut and bolt and analyze them. We've had two very major projects leading to our schools, the middle school and the high school. The high school construction, the middle school rehab. And in those two projects, I would ask anybody if they think that we have overbuilt or overspent on those two projects. I look at those as very successful projects in our history. And the same thought goes into the process for this school as well. And we're not trying to build a Taj Mahal. We're trying to build a 50-year building for anticipated growth for students of the future. You're right, we're not going to buy chalkboards. They probably don't even sell chalkboards anymore. We're going to buy the right technology. We're going to build the right building, right size for the students, right size for the classroom, right size for the technologies they're going to face. So I know I've heard these arguments for the past 3 projects, for the past 20 years. Oh, it's being overbuilt. Oh, it's being too opulent. Oh, why do they need this? This technology or that technology. We're preparing our future. We're preparing our students and the children to lead us in the future, and these are the technologies that are needed. So I would ask people who have those questions to simply look back at the last two projects and ask themselves if they think there's wasted dollars in those projects, because I'll tell you that I don't. My children aren't in the school system anymore. I look at the Smith School and I say, well, the education professionals and the people who are professional at building these schools are suggesting this material for the floor, or that material for the walls, or lockers or no lockers, or whatever they're recommending. I'm going to look at the success of the last two projects and say, I have faith that this third project is probably going to go in the same manner, on time and at or under budget. So what's before the town meeting is really a decision. Is this the right scope, the right price, 30-year financing, and is it necessary? And after the fact, when we comes to borrowing, after, then I will be looking at options that may save the taxpayers money. Some people will think it's, in looking to the taxpayers if necessary to make that decision. So I have a personal feeling about the debt exclusion, but this is not advocacy for the debt exclusion here tonight. This is advocacy for the project of building a school to educate our children in the future, for the future of Danvers. So I appreciate that questions are asked. I would want anybody who has a question to ask them. I would want to be able to give everybody as much information as I can to make an informed decision. But the decision at town meeting is not about debt exclusion. It's about the project. Is the project right sized, right priced, and appropriate for a 30-year borrowing mechanism? Those are my comments. Before I go to the audience, does any of the member of the board want to follow up on any comments that have come before this? So again, this is an open, this is actually about the 25th meeting on this school project. There have been public hearings and public meetings and public workshops for years now, and including the Selectmen and the FinCom meetings. This is about number 25 or 26 on the Smith School project. We want to continue that transparency and ask if there's anybody here who'd like to ask a question, bring up a topic or thought. We're very open to hearing that. Mr. Skarmas, you raised your hand first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Arthur Skarmas, current chairman of the school committee. I do appreciate the preliminary discussion on the financing aspects of the case, of this particular situation, but I want to stress that it is preliminary because the most important question, or the most important thing that has to be decided, which I want to thank you all for emphasizing it in all of your statements, is the fact that we need to have this school built. This is something that we've been working on for many, many years. As you heard the town manager mention 4 applications. This has been a well-thought-out process, well-thought-out plan. There's no question that if anybody takes any time to walk into the current Smith School, although my kids went there and they came out okay, it's very, 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 very much in need of replacement. And so again, I want to thank all of you for what I definitely heard tonight, which is your absolute support for this project to go forward, for town meeting hopefully to vote that way, and for us to come out of the February 4th meeting with a new school that's going to be built. I think you can have much more discussion about how to finance it after that time, and there are good points on both sides of that, on many different sides. But that's something for another day. I just thank you again and emphasize the fact that we do definitely have to have this school passed and have this school built. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Well, I'm last call because I'm a little surprised. But I think that the school has done a good job. The town has done a good job of presenting the case and the school committee, the school itself, and the committee for the school project have done a great job. There is a Saturday workshop. Is there, what's that?
Oh, sorry, Saturday, yeah.
Saturday. We have another workshop where you have another opportunity to look at the warrant article. We have a lot of graphics of the school. We got a lot of good discussion last time about traffic flow and parking counts and so on and so forth, and there may be more out there. So again, let's call it the 26th open meeting, that we welcome people to join us. It's Saturday from 9 to 12.
9 to 12.
Here in this room.
Yep.
For the opportunity to, if you want to get right down to, the paint on the walls, right down to the nuts and bolts, you're more than welcome to join us. And
I don't believe paint colors have actually been chosen yet.
But as much detail as has been presented to the MSBA. So thank you very much for everybody's attention and time to this, and for every question we get. You still have an opportunity before Saturday. If you think of a question when you get home, please fire off an email to the town manager or call him up. I'd ask that you try to give him some time to do any necessary research to get the most accurate answer to your question. Sometimes we get stuff that just stymies us at the time. We just need a little time to look up the details. So at this time, I think we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arthur.
Truly. So,
Number 6.
yeah, I know, but
Town
I
manager.
buried my, number 6, the town manager will update the board on various
Good night, Paul.
items of interest. Mr. Town Manager.
Apparently, I don't have much interesting to say. Everybody's leaving. But I'll start by saying that as a native of Michigan and a long-suffering Lions fan, I just want to let you know how happy I am that the Patriots were able to win on Sunday. It's been a tough 15 years for you guys, and you really deserve to catch a break. So, good luck in this. I think your 25th straight Super Bowl. I wish you all the best. Those who attended MMA this weekend heard that the governor is proposing a 2.7% increase in UGA, the unassigned general government aid. We have not yet seen what the cherry sheet offsets may be this year. And I know a number of conference calls have been scheduled for this week to take a look at any changes in Chapter 70 funding. The governor's made a number of announcements in terms of school financing. I think we in Danvers get nervous when we hear conversations like that, because generally when the formulas are getting looked at, it tends to help the lower income cities. And Danvers, unfortunately, is kind of caught in the middle. We don't qualify for a lot of those aid increases. But we also don't have the resources that a Dover or a Weston does to sort of shrug their shoulders at state aid. We are reliant on state aid, and so any change in that formula could potentially have an impact on us. So that's something I know Lisa and Keith will be monitoring closely, and we'll also be monitoring on the town side. But we're hard at work on the budget, and preparing to have a draft available for the board certainly by March 1st as required. We had some snow this weekend, only 5.5 inches, but it happened overnight and was followed by persistent freezing rain. So it was not an inexpensive storm, but I think an opportunity to say thank you. I think the crews did a tremendous job this weekend responding to that storm and making sure that the roadways were safe. I had no phone calls from the police chief or fire chief, which is generally a good sign when we have weather like that. Just a quick note, we are aiming for the February 19th Selectmen's meeting to have the town's auditor, Melanson and Heath, come and walk us through the fiscal year 18. We're in 3 fiscal year mode right now because we're in 19. We're going to be looking back at our performance in 18, and we're getting ready to budget 20. But February 19th, Melanson and Heath, we made an request for them today to be available that night. I can offer a spoiler alert. We have a clean audit, a couple of minor comments from the auditor that they'll walk through with us as they show the highlights for that. And the last item I was going to note was the very well-attended MLK event last night, but I suspect that one or more selectmen may want to comment on that, so I'll reserve that. And that's all that I have to report on this time.
Thank you. Is there any questions on the town manager's report? The board will consider consent calendar items as they appear below.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Are there any questions on any of the consent calendar items? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. At this time, the board correspondence, selectmen's new business, previous new public business, and selectmen closing comments. I will start with Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take this opportunity to thank a former resident of Danvers and a son and grandson of former town meeting members, Widge Merrill, who now lives in Topsfield, for planning, along with his committee, a winter festival that centered on the meadow. And they had a lot of things to overcome, and at some point, right around the 1st of January, we didn't even know if they're going to be able to freeze it or not. But everything certainly worked out perfectly for them. They had a great opportunity down there, a great occasion. It was a little cool, but they did a great job with it, and the snow held off long enough so that they had a great Meadows program. And I do hope that, I know that they're very thankful that the town, at the very last moment, tried to accommodate as best they could the mowing of that meadow that was wet all year long and was almost impossible. But they did a great job. The town did a great job with it, within the constraints that they had. But for all of us that were old, long-term skaters in the meadow many years ago, this was as close as we get to the old times, if you will. And there was certainly several hundred people down there enjoying that facility in town, which has been a grossly underutilized facility for the past probably 20 years, and much of it because of the difficulty in getting the water to freeze on the meadow for various reasons. But it was a great program, and I want to thank Widge. I know he's not going to watch this, he's in Topsfield, but he's a transplanted Danversite, and he's had some interesting things on the social media that's gone back and forth over the past month. Thank you.
Thank you. Selectman Mills.
I just wanted to say, Steve mentioned the Martin Luther King event at the high school atrium, I think it was yesterday. It was really well attended, despite the weather. While it is on the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King, it is a project of the Danvers Committee on Civil Rights and Inclusion and the school department, and it encompasses a recognition of all forms of discrimination and people being put down. And it was really great. I'd just like to mention that Susan Fletcher and Sally Kearns and Chairman D of the committee and Superintendent Dana and other people in the school department, they put their hearts and souls into this, and it's a really, really beautifully engaging experience. Plus, the atrium was decorated with artwork from, I don't know if it was just the middle school or several of the schools in our department. It was stunning, and people were just stunned at the quality of the work, and it was peace posters and other things that have been done by the students. So it was really a nice thing, and be sure if you missed it this year, please come next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve just mentioned, like it was nothing that the town passed its audit, and I don't think people realize how important following procedure and that is, and why it's important to have an audit. First off, kudos to passing so kindly, because it's not easy. Just look at what happened in Marblehead, whether it was by mistake or intentional. If it wasn't for auditors and having great procedures in place, that's what could happen, and they're in for some serious trouble. So thank you to everybody involved in keeping us clean. The storm, all I heard from people was, because I did have to go out on Sunday, which I'm usually one of those people that say stay off the road. I did have to go, and I had to drive up to see my mom on Lakeview, and I kept saying, if I can't get up Lakeview, I'm just going to send the cops. But I could get up. And that road is pretty steep, and so kudos to the town. I heard from people who know a whole lot more than I do about plowing that they called that a nasty storm. That's what they said that was, and I just couldn't believe that I was able to get out Sunday and Monday morning early. We went to the MMA this last Friday, and I had a great seminar on cyber. In my field, we've been warned at this point to get cyber insurance. And during the seminar, because it is so crazy out there, and my understanding is that we have cyber insurance in our liability if we have MIA, and so I was hoping that somebody would check to see if we do have their insurance, correct?
We're with Maya.
Right, so supposedly in our liability, we have cyber insurance, which is at this point, from like all year going to my seminars, that's almost like a must-be now. So that was a great thing in what the towns have to do, and I know that this town's worked really diligently on getting our servers and that up to speed. And, you know, if you've ever had somebody who's lost their identity, some people can lose a lot. And so I always say it's not, you know, we don't want to get in trouble, it's we don't want a resident's life turned upside down because of us. So it's really important that we stay on top of that. And then I went to how to get visitors to stay downtown. Actually, Gardner and I went, and at first I'm like, I don't want to listen to the Beverly mayor. I just don't want to listen to him tell me how great a job they've done with Restaurant Row and all that, but they have, and he was fantastic. It was really some great ideas I hope that we get to talk about. I know Gardner and I were a little surprised, but we need to sell our town like he just sold Beverly at that. Everybody wants to go there now. So really kind of excited about what we're doing downtown to be able to be as excited as he was. So that was my great time over the last 2 weeks. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll follow up on the MMA as well. Danvers was well represented. I saw a lot of people there from the Danvers Town Administration. Diane and I went on different days. And I saw them not only on the trade show floor, but also in seminars and workshops that were pertinent to their specialty. There was a lot of good workshops. The one about keeping visitors downtown was really interesting. And I have a lot of notes in a different notebook to say, do we do this, do we do that? Following up on some of the programs that Beverly, and there were 2 other towns that were there as well. There was a lot of good discussion from the floor about different grant opportunities that they've availed themselves of, and so I'll be following up. I went to another one about marijuana preparedness. I also went to, there was a couple of them I went to. Some of them on the second day were very technical towards specific departments. Very accounting-specific ones or planning-specific ones that were more geared towards the actual professionals who do that. But I went in both days. I did represent us at the Mass Selectmen's Association meeting. The topic, the speaker talked about potential changes in the cherry sheet funding mechanism that they're proposing and that the governor is considering. It was interesting to see how they calculate each city and town's participation on the cherry sheet. Then I also, there was a MMA Association meeting right after that, where they asked that each city and town to vote on a couple of upcoming amendments that they're going to propose to the state legislators, and I can get details for the group if they want it. It was a good 2 days. I'm going to build off of your discussion about the audit. I think one of the things that's happened is we become a victim of our own success, which is to say that we so consistently hear no major audit findings that we almost take it for granted. That's a uniqueness. I actually, on the floor of the MMA trade show, I talked to Melanson and Heath people, and I was talking to some people who don't do our audits, but do other cities and towns. And obviously they won't discuss particulars, but to a person, they said, you know, that the town administration, the school administration, and the enterprise funds are all very open and eager to present all the information they ask for. That they're very willing and able and very supportive, and that this independent audit really is the affirmation to the citizens that town administration, school administration, and the enterprise fund administrations are all following the best practices and doing the right things with the tax dollars. So when they come before us in a couple of weeks, I'm going to say the same thing, which is it's a credit to the town administration for being so open and transparent with the tools and mechanisms they use for managing the taxpayers' money, and I appreciate it. I did attend MLK with David and Steve, and it was heartening. Seth Moulton came and spoke. There were a number of dignitaries. We had 3 choral groups, including the prep sent over Swingtown, which was very engaging. The high school had the choral group, and the Universalist Unitarian Church sent their group with them. There was artwork from all of the elementary schools, the middle school and the high school, as well as video presentations from some high school students, which were really engaging. So it was heartening to see, and congratulations to the committee for a great presentation, and again, to the town for offering up the assistance to get those things done. So I enjoyed that immensely. I think that's all of the updates I have this evening, so I will now ask Mr. Bennett to close out the night.
Thank you, Gardner. I did want to report that on January 12th, I attended a local climate summit at Merrimack College hosted by the Sierra Club. There was a lot of communities throughout the Commonwealth that were there. It was their 3rd presentation in the state, and they said it was by far the largest and best attended event that they've had. They were very excited about it. I brought back some flyers, and I have some information about green cities, renewable energies, LED lighting that I didn't bother sending over to the town manager of the Board of Selectmen, given that the school is our focal point for the next week or so. But I will supply some flyers that he can distribute in a packet, and my notes and questions for a possible discussion at some time on the agenda in the near future. Bruce Tarr addressed us, as well as 2 of the new state reps from the Andover area. It was very well attended, and there was some good information, but I'll get more details later. And with that, I'd like everybody to remember the veterans, current people in the service, and veterans who have served our country very well for many years. So if you see a veteran, thank them. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much, Danvers.